Today we're going to talk about the assign output in our Patchbay. Unlike all the others, which have a very specific source coming out of the filter, whatever the gate signal is, whatever the keyboard CV is, this one we can change what's coming out of it. To do that, we use a couple key presses here. So the default should be accent. If you're following along in your manual, this is page 41, the Crave tempo and assign mode select. It doesn't give you a whole lot of information, but it does tell you at least what each one is called. So if we press Shift, Hold 8, this takes us into our mode. You'll see that yellow light is above 1 here. We need the yellow light to be above 2. So we're going to press the right button. Now the little green light tells us which assignable output mode we are in. So right now the green light says we're in 1, and that's the default. That's the accent coming out of the sequencer. If I wanted to change that, I would press a different number down here. So I'm going to go back to 1. And then when you want to save what you just chose, again, Shift, Hold 8. All right. So now whatever's coming out of the assign is the accent. And what happens when you play an accent? Well, let's create a sequence first. Another thrilling major scale. All right. Now I can accent any step in this sequence. If I press record and then say Shift 4. Now I'm editing this one. I'm going to put an accent on it. You know there's an accent on it because it just lit up number 7. We haven't talked about the sequencer yet. I don't expect you to know any of this, so don't worry about it. All we're doing is we're setting an accent on step number 4. Now we should hear the 4th note kind of pop out volume-wise. So it's kind of subtle, but there is an accent on that 4th note. That helps a little. So, now, what I can do, whenever an accent occurs in the sequence, the assign is going to output a 5-volt signal. So if I put the assign on, say, oscillator FM. Well, let's put it on the, yeah. And I push play. We hear it right there on the accent. It's quickly adding 5 volts. Let's put it on the CV. Of course, we know that a 5-volt difference adds 5 octaves. That's why it's such a difference. Send it to osmod. Right now my oscillator mod is affecting pulse width. So you hear that changing whenever the accent pops up. Send it to the cutoff. Send it to resonance. Send it to mix CV. It quickly jumps over to the noise side. Send it to reset. Doesn't do anything there. For just a moment, it held it. We could send it to the CV, it'll just get louder. Ooh, it didn't like that. So that is sending the output of accent through the assign. The next 3 assign modes have to do with clock, controlling an external tempo. So like if you had a drum machine attached to this and you were using this sequencer to time it, you'd be sending out through assign put modes 2, 3, 4. So let's go to assign mode 5, which is the sequencer step ramp. To do that, I do Shift Hold 8, page 2. So the yellow one is above part 2, and I press 5. All right, Shift Hold 8 to save that. Now, what's coming out of my assign is an increasing ramp wave. It goes from negative 5 volts to positive 5 volts across the length of the pattern. So if I was to set that to, say, my cutoff, when I start the pattern, the cutoff will be very low, and as it proceeds through the pattern, the cutoff will increase as it adds voltage to it. So you can just hear it starting, entirely cut off and coming up. Let's switch to high pass mode. Oh, we're still getting that accent. I'm going to take that out. So what's happening is as we go through the sequence, it's adding voltage up to positive 5 volts until it hits the end of the sequence, then it drops back to the beginning, regardless of how long your sequence is. Right now I'm just defaulting to a little 8 note, but you could have up to 32 steps, I believe it is. And it would take the entire 32 steps to increase there. I could also change this to something else. Let's change it to oscillator CV. And so it's adding voltage, it's quickly jumping up octaves. Look at the mix CV. So what it's doing is each step is rotating this knob higher and higher until we're just hearing white noise. Kind of like that patch. It makes it really easy to at least audibly describe what's happening. Let's switch our assign mode now to step saw. This is the exact opposite of ramp. Shift Hold 8, page 2, mode 6, Shift Hold 8 to save. Press play. This starts with the positive voltage and then drops. So the exact opposite. Next one is the step triangle wave. This is mode 7. What this one does is, during the pattern, it ramps up, and then during the next time through the pattern, it will go down. Send that to cutoff. Going up, going down. Send it to resonance. All right. Now, the next one is very handy. Shift Hold 8, page 2. Output mode 8 is random. And for every step in your sequence, it's going to output a random voltage. from -5 to +5. Now, on cutoff, that doesn't make a whole lot of difference. But if I send that to oscillator CV, hey, now we get some random beeps and boops. Very useful. Now, it's sending anywhere between -5 to +5 volts, so we're getting a huge range of pitches. If we don't want such a wild range, let's use our VC mix as an attenuator. I'll take the output of the Assign and instead go to Mix 2. Take the output of VC mix and send that to oscillator CV. If I turn this all the way down, we're just hearing the oscillator. But as I let more of that randomness in, now I can determine kind of the wildness of the range that I'm allowing in. And if I want to change the range of my sequence, that's easily done just by pressing a key while it's playing. Mostly high notes, mostly low notes. So now we can get those fun patterns of weirdness. But now, let's make something a little more random. I want to send that randomness to multiple places. So I'm going to take the output of my VC mix, which is the amount of randomness, and send it to my multiple. And now I'm going to send the output of one multiple to oscillator CV like we were doing before. And I'm going to send the other output of the multiple, the other copy of my randomness, to tempo. And again, if you have not enabled through the Behringer synth tool on your computer your tempo to take CV as its input, you'll need to do that before this works. Now, my randomness is controlling both pitch and the tempo. You can see how it's slower and then it's faster. You can kind of change the general amount by increasing this knob here. This way you'll generally get faster things. Down here you'll generally get slower things with occasional faster. Max randomness, max speed. So some very fun glitchy effects. And then you could fill in those spaces with your envelope generator, your VCA mode set to on. Too much fun. All right, so anything that generates randomness is cool. So assign output 8 as random, generates cool. All right. Step mode 9, shift hold 8, page 2, shift 1 gives you number 9. Simply outputs a pulse on the first step of your sequence. So I could send, say, an oscillator resonance thing to the very first, and so whenever the sequence starts, it will send a voltage. So you just hear right here, it goes meh. So if you wanted something to happen every time your sequence starts, assign output number 9, step 1 trigger, would allow that to happen. The next ones, assign outputs 10 through 16, have to do with MIDI. So I'm going to have to alter my setup a little bit to bring my MIDI keyboard into frame. I'll see you in a second. Okay, so now we have our MIDI keyboard in view, and we are going to work on the MIDI assign outputs. Shift hold 8, page 2, and then we're going to do shift 2 to make sure that we're in spot 10, or 2 plus 8. Shift hold 8 to save it. Now when I play my keyboard, we are getting pitches. I can take the assign out now, and let's send it to, the resonance. Now, the weight with which I press the key will send an assign value, will send voltage from the assign value to the resonance. So if I press it lightly, we get no effect. If I press it heavier, we get more resonance. So that was cut off. Let's do that with oscillator CV. Depending on how hard I hit the key, we actually get a higher or lower pitch. I could send it to mix CV, and how hard I hit it will depend on whether I get pitch or noise. Alright, so MIDI velocity is being sent through assign when that's set to 10. Let's shift to the next one. This is MIDI channel pressure. This requires you to have an aftertouch keyboard. The key step is an aftertouch keyboard. So what I can do now is I could set this to, say, resonance. And as I press a key, I'm just getting the tone. If I press now, I add resonance. So aftertouch is something that occurs after you're holding the key down. So of course, you know, your standard Steinway piano does not come with such a feature. You press down, that's the sound you get, but I can add pressure, and now I get in addition to my resonance. I could do that with pitch. Of course, if I do that with oscillator CV, I'm just getting 10 octaves. Let's do it with cutoff. That is aftertouch. The next one, assignable output 12, is pitch bend, which most synthesizers have a knob here, probably spring loaded. This one has a little touchpad. So my assign output is now coming from whatever is being done with the pitch wheel. So again, let's send that to oscillator CV. And let's just hold a key. Now, this is being controlled by MIDI messages, which are whole numbers. So this is not going to be a smooth thing, like if I was controlling it with electricity, because this is in 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 128. So if I go really lightly, you can actually hear the steps. Now, that's not terribly useful, but attenuate it. Send it to mix 2. Output of VC mix goes to oscillator CV. Now I can determine the amount of pitch bend using my VC mix knob. I believe the lowest you can get this is a whole step. Yeah. Okay. Our next assignable output is MIDI CC1. Now, every MIDI instrument is different these days, but usually MIDI CC1 is whatever the mod wheel is. So if your instrument has a mod wheel, its output is likely assigned to MIDI control change 1. So right now my assign is going to mix 2. Let's send it to, let's send it to cutoff. So as I raise the mod, it raises the cutoff or lowers it. I could send it to oscillator CV. And usually the difference between a mod wheel and a pitch bend is pitch bend usually snaps back, mod wheel stays where you leave it. And again, it's a MIDI message, so it's stepped, so you hear each individual note. There's no gliding between them. The next 3 are similar. So assignable output 14 is MIDI CC2. That's usually assigned to a breath controller. I don't have any breath controllers. The thing where you blow into it and it actually measures the pressure of your air against a membrane and then uses that to send MIDI data. I don't have one of those. MIDI CC4 is what happens when we use assignable output 15. This is usually assigned to a foot pedal. So if you have a foot pedal attached to your keyboard, you can press that and it's going to send a signal. And then the last one, assignable output 16, is MIDI CC7. And that is usually the volume control on your MIDI keyboard. But again, we have so much control over our MIDI instruments these days, you can usually go into the software and change what every knob controls. But those are the standards. MIDI control 1 is usually the mod wheel. MIDI control 2 is a breath controller. MIDI control 4 is foot pedal, and MIDI control 7 is the volume knob, if your MIDI controller has one. All right, now we have gone through every point on the Patchbay. What awaits us next? Well, we still have the sequencer to do. So, I'll see you next time.